Hi, and thanks for joining this webinar today. Very excited with our list of panelists. Obviously, today's session is going to be on the contact center of tomorrow, trends that will shape the customer service industry. And we have some titans here with us today from a number of different organizations that are going to lend their point of view on exactly what the future may hold when it comes to customer service and the role contact centers have to play. My name is Guillaume. I'm the head of partnerships and alliances here at 3C Logic, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. Quick round of introductions in no particular order. We have Dennis Sanav, who is the CEO here at 3C Logic. Dennis, great to have you. We have Sharaf, who is the co-founder and chief revenue officer over at Observe.ai. Sharaf, really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Nitin, who leads the product for outbound management and customer service workflows over at ServiceNow. Nitin, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
So let's start with you, Nitin. Since I introduced you last, we'll let you kick it off. So Nitin, you being from ServiceNow, and ServiceNow sort of has obviously set itself apart and has taken sort of a position on the idea of digital transformation, self-service, and really the importance, obviously the opportunity to really workflow the world a little bit better. I'm curious, if we sort of start from 10,000 feet up, take me a little bit about, take me through the term or the coin digital transformation, and perhaps more importantly, not focus on the digital, but the transforming part of it. Are organizations transforming? And when we apply that to the customer service space, what's your take on what the future holds?
Sure, Guillaume. So, the way that I think about it, the term or the phrase digital transformation, I think really came about in the last 5 or 10 years. And the easy way to categorize it is a lift and shift of technology and processes to the cloud. But I think that was level one. What digital transformation really is doing is it's instrumenting areas of processes and automation that weren't instrumented before. Let me step back and take a little bit of a higher level view of this. And as an analogy, I'll go to the world of astrophysics. Now, I'm not an astrophysicist, so don't ask me about anything beyond this. But when you think about astrophysics, you think about the notion of dark energy. They talk about dark energy as this vast energy that shapes the universe around us, but we can't see it, we can't sense it, but it makes everything around us work. What digital transformation is doing is taking all that unstructured work, all of those things that happen that we weren't aware of in an organization, and bringing them into the view of management and instrumenting it. That instrumentation gives you an opportunity to drive structure to that. And that's really where the ServiceNow platform comes into play. Once you can instrument things, you can drive structure and you can drive workflow. Once you drive workflow, you have greater visibility across the board. What you see is organizations are starting to realize this now as we are at the tail end of the great migration to the cloud, because the cloud is actually afforded both from a computational horsepower perspective, but also from a process update perspective, the ability to instrument things that we couldn't instrument before.
Okay, so all that makes sense. Where does the contact center fit within that context? I mean, obviously, the last couple of years have been, have certainly tested a lot of customer service models, right? Mm-hmm. Things that were accepted or good as is or good enough. That's no longer the case. So a lot of organizations are sort of using what's, the events of the last year and change to sort of really reassess, what some of what you described means for them. So take me through that a little bit.
So when you instrument things, you have a fundamental shift in where the contact center sits in the entire life cycle of a customer journey. Historically, when you think about customer service, it was the one department that you stood up and you waited for something to happen, right? It was in a defensive position. A customer had to call in before you acted. You had to hear from your internal departments before you responded. With instrumentation, what you have now is proactive telemetry coming in from customers or devices that are sitting out in the in the larger world, and data that's feeding you And what that does is it takes the contact center on offense, and it really elevates what the contact center's responsibility is in the value chain. They're not the forgotten aspect of customer experience. They're actually critical in making sure that there's a continuity of value that's provided across the entire customer journey.
So that's really interesting, right? Because when you think about call centers, you hear the term call center, you think old school, right? I mean,
That's right.
the whole idea, and in part, if you didn't know better, you'd think that, ServiceNow would advocate that all things should be digital and all things can be addressed by self-service. Although you and I both know that that's not the case. It's really about balancing the two. So let me take the topic to Dennis here, since we're talking about call centers, calls, self-service. So Dennis, do you think, what's your take on the role of call centers, especially in this age where everyone is trying to push towards self-service and digitalization, which would suggest that call centers are on their way out? But you would disagree, right?
I think that call center, the way they were, are on their way out. But obviously, there's still a place for voice and communication with humans and agents in all this. We're at Logic, we're big fans of what ServiceNow is doing. We're true believers. We started working with ServiceNow 6 years ago, and we've seen where Nitin and you guys have taken it. And what's interesting in my mind is that we are starting to see that the silos that were there before, when everything was on premise, so where you had the call centers separated from where your data was residing, it's all broken now. And ServiceNow is doing a really good job at bridging the gap between the two with this this new verb apparently, which is workflow. So we're going to workflow everything. Well, and I think that's ServiceNow is doing an extremely good job at workflowing everything that's digital. But what we've seen, and it really we've seen even more, I guess, during the pandemic, is that there is still a need for human in the equation. There's still a need for communication with people. There's still a need for voice, and I think we'll get to this with Shara. Another thing that's been happening over the past couple of years is that actually voice has become voice AI. Voice is now translated into text. A text can be mine, and then all of a sudden, all the richness of voice has been discovered. And so we think that, number one, the technology has changed in a way which makes voice even more interesting, and it's more important to integrate voice with the other digital flow. And the other thing is we realize that there's still that need for empathy, no matter what.
Well, I couldn't disagree with you more, or agree with you more. Sorry about that, a little Freudian slip there. But you brought up, I mean, you basically pointed to Sharth when it comes to AI. So, I mean, Sharth, one, what we seem to agree on is, everything is shifting quite a bit, right? People are, the technology is making things more interesting and allowing for circumstances, to your point, and opportunities and possibilities that weren't there before. Voice and the call center is going through its own form of transformation. But then there's AI, right? So take me through, what is your take on AI and its role in the coming years?
I think it's a very broad question, but I think to take away the highlights of what Nitin said and what Dennis said, right? So one, you're seeing a shift of a call center not being the cost center only anymore to actually being a value and a strategic benefit center. I think that transformation has started happening. The second thing that probably was accelerated by the pandemic is the value of a customer service interaction today. It could be digital, it could be chat, it could be email, and mostly it could be voice. The value of that conversation has increased manifold, right? Because today you're not going to your nearest grocery store to buy, and the grocery store's interaction with their customer is through a customer service channel, right? And that's where now people don't look at a voice call as $10 of cost. they look at that voice call as that opportunity to connect with their customer to build lifetime value, right? And this is where the whole concept of insights and data and workflow and how everything comes together actually becomes very important. And what AI's role in this whole digital transformation journey is to add value to that data set, right? So today you have workflows and data and every organization collating so many interactions across their user base. And AI is trying to make sense of all that data and aiding those workflows to be a lot more efficient, right? So that's where we see the role of a company like Observe.ai, and there are like a ton of companies who are trying to bring innovation in this space. And that's how our role will be shaping up in the coming years. And that's probably the best way to answer the larger AI question coming in. But I do see one proverbial trend, right? So initially people were thinking about AI as being that kind of a black box where people were scared about investing in AI technologies. People did not know that bringing in AI, would that mean taking away jobs from people? But I think that's what people have now realized, that, hey, AI is essentially, in a contact center landscape, there is so many operational modalities. What AI is doing is actually making each of these processes a lot more efficient. And it's not about taking away jobs from people, but it's about making everybody a better representative of themselves. So again, just wanted to add color to that.
No, I mean, I'm glad you did, because you're right. Most individuals fear that AI is, is going to take away jobs, right? It's going to replace individuals. If you replace individuals, you lose the opportunity for empathy, right? Dennis, to your earlier point. And then in the grand scheme of things, you run the risk of losing those meaningful customer relationships. But then I know you and I have had past conversations about this where it really is the opposite, right?
That's right. And I think a big factor of that is when you look at customer service, it is a demand-driven environment, and the demand for support is going to outstrip your capacity to supply it on a one-to-one basis, right? This is the evolution of one-to-one call centers into omni-channel solutions that could have self-service, which actually started to address, some of that excess demand. But with machine learning AI added into that, what you're starting to do is you're starting to automate the mundane and elevate the meaningful. So only the important, aspects, ones where there's critical complexity involved, get the human element, connected. Another thing that I think about a lot in this space, and I think this is true across almost the entire economy, is that the economics of where customer service fits and where machine learning fit is also tied to the broader economic transition to recurring revenue models, subscriptions. We subscribe to more today in our consumer lives, than we ever did before. And that fundamentally changes when the value is exchanged, right? When you subscribe, you do not own, you trade value. And there's a risk of losing future value if you're not served well. And so there's, that drives a huge need to elevate what used to be, again, as Sharat mentioned, a cost center into something that sits right in the middle of the value chain. And when you're dealing with massive asymmetries of inbound requests, you have to apply machine learning algorithms to it in order to figure out, the best way to serve your customer.
So that actually feeds into a little bit of what Observe.ai does, right, Charles? So my last question was broad. Let me see if I can give you a fair one this time. So when you talk about Observe.ai, one of the things that you focus on is quite literally what Nitin is alluding to, which is all about scaling the size of what it is that you're trying to solve for in the context of customer service. So how do you use AI to scale the effort to make it easier to deliver better customer experiences and make sure that those subscriptions stay with you? Take us through that.
Well, I think one of the big challenges that we kind of came across when we were starting Observe.ai is like voice calls, for example, right, was probably the largest data set that every organization had, but they didn't have an easy way to process all these voice conversations, right? So you could always go and analyze chat, you could probably go and analyze social media data, But analyzing voice data, which still forms about 70% of all customer interactions globally, that was like the biggest black box. Like there was no easy economical way to analyze that data. There was no easy way to accurately mine that data, and there was not the right way to represent that data, right? So this is where like a lot of large platforms like say ServiceNow, building the whole platform in a way where you can actually inject the workflow started making a whole lot sense. And then organizations like 3C Logic bringing in their platform to actually make analysis of a voice call and supporting that voice call also made a lot of sense. And that's where our platform got added up, where there was a system of record which ServiceNow and 3C Logic provided. And then there was companies like Observe.ai, which became the system of intelligence, where we now said, hey, don't make organization-wide value decisions based on a smaller data set. Take this large black box that you had, which was your voice interactions, analyze 100% of that interactions, take in all that intelligence from there, and then make better organization-wide decisions, right? So this is probably where voice AI, which is like the new term that came in, is where like by analyzing that 100% of voice interactions, now you could make a lot more value-driven decisions for the company.
Yeah, and you know what the interesting thing is, I would argue that a couple of years ago, you know, people would have put this in the nice to have category, right? And yet now you talk about a black box. I mean, let's look at what happened, you know, when all of a sudden everyone had to send all their agents home, right? You know, at least when they were all in the same room, you had a visual line of sight. They could raise their hand and ask for help. I mean, if you weren't listening to calls, you could at least walk the hallways. But you know, that went away overnight, and it's not even clear that that business model is going to come back the way it was, right? Everyone's talking about hybrid work, working from home. So the black box got blacker, if that's or darker or bigger or whatever the term may be. Dennis, what's your take on the work from home model? I mean, is that here to stay? Because obviously, part of what we're solving for, you know, because of the work from home model, made voice AI almost a necessity, right? Because you need insights. You were only dealing with a small sample size. Then you were dealing with a smaller one because you didn't even have the visual aspect of things to fall back on. So take us through some of the challenges, or at least what you see happening in terms of the work model for contact centers, if we look at that trend.
Well, I mean, it is changed forever. We're not coming back. We're not going back to where we were before. Of course, there will still be a need for very large call centers for very specific usage. I mean, that's not going away completely. But we've realized, and I think every organization, and I know we realize for our own organization, how efficient people were working from home. And so the challenge when it comes to the call center was that all of a sudden you had to adapt to this new reality where not only the agents were working from home, but the administrator, the supervisors, everybody was working from home. So clearly a need for analytics tools in order to better understand how you could rate, train, operate those agents. But now we're in that situation where we are going to be able to maybe go back to normal. And I know that, again, for organization, it's never going to be the same. So you mentioned hybrid. It most likely will be hybrid. There are some benefits in having people in the same room, but we realize that they're actually more limited than we thought previously. I think that working from home is going to become more and more prevalent, even for the call centers. There are some call centers out there that are only 100% working from home. Some of them were already doing it before COVID. That was definitely the exception. But we see more and more organization, and where it's also interesting. It's not just the analytics; it's the fact that we can. Those call centers can give a very secure environment and good working conditions for those agents. So the agents are able to work from home because they might be on ServiceNow and have 3C Logic on the same screen. They don't need to have 4 or 5 different monitors in order to do their job. They're able to work from home because the work from home environment is also becoming a lot more secure than it was before. Lots of progress in that regard. So I think it's here to stay, and it's going to grow. And as organizations as well, I'm sure as ServiceNow and Shara are looking at ways to make it even better.
So keeping in line with that, so Nitin, when you were talking about everyone subscribing to everything, Dennis, you're saying that people are probably going to stay home more than they used to, and we're talking about the importance of at some point still maintaining a relationship between the customer and the service provider, right? Is the contact center, and I'll start with Dennis, but I'd like for everyone to answer this question. Is the contact center, is its new role, is it the new face of the organization? I mean, brick and mortar is not what it was either. It may not recover for a while. What's your take on that?
Well, it is and it is not. Because actually there is so much that's going to be handled by self-service. So much is going to be handled by those chat bots, those voice bots. So yes, the call center is still in there and still a big part of it, and is absolutely essential. I mean, we know that today 30% of digital interaction end up with an agent at the end. So that link between the two needs to be there at all time. But so I think that for organizations, the challenge is to balance two things. There could be a tendency to go for ROI and say, hey, I need to self-serve as much as possible because it's attractive. I mean, you look at the numbers, and if you do more of it, and all of a sudden, you get a very quick ROI. But at the same time, you have this demand for much better customer service. So that if you're trying to beat your competitors, you need to provide that better customer service. So thanks to the analytics that are available now throughout the spectrum of all the different workflows and all the different channels, you as an organization can figure out where you're going to put the throttle. Are you going to favor a little bit more self-service, a little bit less self-service? And some organization might decide that because they have a monopoly, they can actually self-serve you to death and make your life miserable. Most organizations do not have that choice. Most organizations will have to find where it makes sense and what they can afford and how they can provide that that first resolution experience through the first interaction, whatever the interaction is, because that's what the customer at the end wants.
Nitin, I'll turn it over to you. What's your take?
So I think there's a couple of things. One is our new general manager here at ServiceNow for Customer Workflows, John Ball, comes in, with a very deep understanding of AI, and also an understanding of what needs to be done. One of the things he's talking about is everyone is going to work from everywhere. So it's not just home, right? You could literally be anywhere and be productive. And that, I think, goes back to the notion of ambient compute, right? Which is the fact that computational horsepower is now available literally everywhere around the planet. There's tremendous value to that. One of the things that I think you have to remember, and this goes back to Dennis's point around how do you make the decision between how much self-service to how much engaged service do you provide, is I think there's a natural pivot that takes place. I call it the great inversion. And that you'll notice that inversion when you provide enough self-service that actually the call handle times that come in start to increase. The reason that occurs is those are the problems that really need to have collaborative resolution, right? They're not the simple one and done. They need to reach back into an engineering department, reach back into supply chain, reach back into other places. Those jobs and those types of resources are going to be ever present in an expanding environment. I don't know of a single company, whether it be a product or service, that ships a simpler product in their next release. Every release gets more complex. And as they get more complex, there's a lot more involvement in making sure that the product is up and running, particularly in the subscription environment that I talked about. From a consumer perspective, I don't care if your firmware slowed me down. The fact is, I'll go to another product. You need to be on top of that. That requires what Kate Leggett, from Forrester Research calls the rise of the super agent, and an agent that really sits at the critical juncture of all of this, to be able to take the telemetry that's coming in from external sources and simplify that and extract really where the problem sets are and redirect that. So the era of the massive, and I'm old enough here. I've double jacked, to use the term in the contact center world. I've double jacked with agents on every continent except for Antarctica. And if there's a call center in Antarctica, let me know. I'll fly down there and we'll sit down with them as well. But in that era of large contact centers, much of it was based off of cost containment. And you saw that behavior, which was reaching over the aisle, what is called prairie dogging, right? Pop your head above the cube to look around to see if somebody can help you. Complex problems usually require collaboration that's more than just reaching, across the aisle. And so in many ways, we're set up for this next next spurt of customer interaction in the way that digitization is transforming customer service.
So, Shara, the question goes to you, and I'm going to give it a twist, which is, if based on what Nina just said, obviously, you're actually talking about the super agent, the ability to provide a more sophisticated experience. That's what we're talking about here, right? Is being able to, actually elevate your game and have super agents that aren't just answering the mundane, but now can address the complex. So I'll stick to the original question, which goes back to, what's your take on, is the contact center now becoming the new face of the organization? And if it is, I would assume, and I know that this is your strong suit, that coaching is going to play a big role in how successful you are.
Yeah, I have a more definitive point of view. And my point of view is, yes, the contact center as we know it has already changed on its head. And there's like a clear line of sight where customer service interactions went up by 37% last year. I know a lot of that went to the airlines and the hotel industry to reschedule bookings and flights, but irrespective, the volume of interactions went up significantly, right? And in the same tune, the digital transformation outlook also changed drastically last year, right? So now what is very clearly happening in the contact center space, you have what you call as tier 1 queries, where you don't need a human to solve your problem. People will always go into a self-service scenario to solve that problem. But then there is a very clear interaction data set which cannot be solved in self-service just yet. And they'll want the fastest way for somebody to solve a problem. They'll always make that phone call. And that's where the whole concept of a super agent comes in, because now they have made that investment to talk to you as a brand. And now every brand is thinking about that as an investment they're making to give back to a customer, right? It could be in the form of subscription economy, because the value of that call is very important. It could be a way of them actually increasing CSAT. It is a way for them to be the best representative of the brand at that point. But that human actually ends up being the super agent, where now people are not just thinking about throwing bodies to solve a problem. Now people are thinking about, how do we enable this agent to be the best representative of our brand? And that's where people are investing on, hey, how do we make this agent the best representative of the brand? How do we invest in agent tools, agent enablement tools, coaching tools? How do we make this agent so much more well-informed? Because the goal is not to focus on closing a call quickly. The goal is, if the customer has made this decision of not solving it by himself, but actually to call a brand, now the brand has taken the onus on themselves to make sure that the customer by the end of the call has his problem solved, right? So that has changed the narrative of support center, because now it's just not about, hey, just have somebody to answer the phone call. Now it's all about, hey, have somebody who can solve the problem. And that narrative and the change in mindset is change in contact center as we move today.
And I think, just to add on to that, this goes to something I've been talking about for a very long time, which is, Sarat, you mentioned the term brand. We often when you think about brand, people obviously think of the marketing department. And, in many ways, it's true. And as a result, the CMO has risen to the C-suite level because they supposedly control the brand. Now, I separate that into two different buckets, right? There is the brand that you set forth, what you portray yourself as. Then there's the brand promise. Now, the brand promise is only delivered in two ways. One is the product or service that your brand set forth is delivering the value, and the other is, are you there when I need you to be? Are you there when I need you to be is a customer service equation, and from that perspective, customer service is the face, of your company. We can all, and we've all seen the videos, and we'll pick on certain hospitality industries of where customer service treats you poorly, oftentimes dragging you off of an airplane or something of that sort. The damage is seen the next morning in the public stock markets, right? I've said this for many years, and it's actually a good friend of mine, Brad Smith, who used to own customer advocacy at Yahoo. He said, at Yahoo, my job as running customer advocacy is to protect the company's goodwill, which is the delta between the financial assets as described in GAAP accounting and what you're perceived as, Apple being a $2 trillion company, for example. The $2 trillion is not the sum total of the assets that they have, it's the perception of the value, which is essentially owned by how they treat me, right? And that's a customer service behavior. So this is where and you see I'll get fired up about this. Well, I do think that, customer workflows, customer service is a critical part of the value chain. And it's finally being recognized as something that is so important for, every aspect. And again, it gets back to the human interaction then, can't be mechanical, robotic. I'm going to read off of a script and, hey, can you reset the password or turn this thing on and off for me? That doesn't help anymore.
So I couldn't agree with you more on that one. So I got a question for you, Dennis. So you had mentioned earlier in one of your responses, everything was very siloed in the past. You had your contact center, your data center or environment or platform that people were working out of, and you'd be lucky if there's just one of them. I'm kind of curious. I think we all agree that this is, the end states that we're talking about are enterprise organizations, if they could snap their fingers, would love to be there overnight. How easy is it to get to some of the end states that we're talking about? I mean, Dennis, you've talked to your fair share of large organizations. Some of their problems, as much as they'd like to talk about AI, they still have very traditional issues that they got to solve for first, like having a call record associated to ServiceNow, for example, so that I don't have to go in the back office, looking through records in a separate system. Is this going to be an easy transition, Dennis? I mean, can it be an easy one? Are we talking about years? What are your thoughts?
Well, nothing is easy. I mean, this is it's a process. It's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. And we see it, talking to our existing customers and new opportunities. Those large enterprises, they don't turn on a dime. They really want to go faster. That digital transformation is in itself something extremely difficult to achieve, but they know they have to do it so that they can achieve all the other things that they want to do. But I think that when we look at the three different people on this call here, you put all those pieces together, and all of a sudden you get something very, very powerful. We just closed a very, very large convenience store in the US. They were on ServiceNow. They've been on ServiceNow for a few years. They were looking for something that they couldn't find anywhere else, unless they had the integration of what we all do here: ServiceNow, 3C Logic on top of it, and on top of 3C Logic, Observe.ai. Why? Because they were looking for the voice of the customer, the thing that they were interested in, and they knew that they were not getting and meant millions and millions of dollars of additional profit if they got it right, is to make sure that the customer, the voice of the customer was elevated. Nitin, you were talking about the C-suite, elevated to the C-suite. So they could actually even they ask us, can you give us snippets from some customers? Will we be able to really give that to the CEO so that he can finally hear what's actually happening on the ground? So I think that all the pieces are there. Some customers are, obviously are already out there and testing the limit of what we can do together here to get them to a better place and their customers to a better experience. But some other companies are a little further behind, and it's going to take them longer. If it takes them too long, they'll lose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nitin, any or Sharth, any thoughts about that?
No, I think I second what Dennis was saying, because even today, when we talk to enterprises, about still 70% of them are still on-premise, wanting to move to cloud. If you go and ask every CIO, we surveyed recently about 250 CIOs, everybody says we want to move to the cloud, but this transition, this journey is not very easy, right? I think this is where like everything that's happening in the whole digital transformation space, everything that's happening that we are showing as to how mutual integrations between various tech stack providers will actually make this journey a lot more seamless, right? So the example that Dennis gave, I think this large brand wouldn't have made this change if there was not that seamless integration between different stack providers. Like you're talking about system of records to a system of intelligence, right? And that is the biggest barrier to entry for a lot of these enterprises, moving from where they were to where they want to be. Everybody has an intent to do that, but I think that's where providers like us coming together, kind of creating that seamless experience to make that journey easy for people, is probably the way a lot of these consolidations and integrations would happen. And this would facilitate this large move from on-prem to cloud, large digital transformation journey. And then you will start hearing this whole buzzword of AI transformation happening very soon. And this integration between technology stack providers will be the core for all these transformations to happen.
Yeah, I like the term AI transformation. You may have coined that here first, and if you have, we're gonna make sure the rest of the world knows it. But that's a really, really good point, Sharth. Let me see if I can paraphrase what you just said, which is, when we break down the silos, we're not suggesting that you have to get down to one provider that does everything well. Instead, what we're suggesting is it's about finding the provider or group of providers that have no conflict of interest and work well together, where it really becomes, not to kill an overused phrase, but the 1 + 1 = 3 type outcome. I mean, what are your thoughts about that, Nitin?
Yeah, I think we've all experienced it when we call into a call center, and you can hear the agent fumbling, and here's the phrase that they'll say: "My system is acting slow." No, that's not what's happening. They're all tabbing between systems to figure out which system to get to, right? And I often joke, back in the day, what that told me was that their IT organization decided that integration was going to happen at the keyboard level, right? Which is essentially they were not going to integrate and let the poor contact center agent figure out where to go to next, right? This has massive impact in multiple areas. One is when you have all of these systems, and we used to actually keep a running list of this, back in previous companies I worked for. Average contact center agent was having to touch maybe up to a dozen systems, throughout the day. The challenge in that environment was they were focused on the system and not the person first of all, and that presented a huge problem. The value was lost in the interaction, and I think this is the pivot, right? Getting back to what I mentioned before, the economic behavior is driven by the fact that the value transferred when ownership transferred. Therefore, all you're doing is providing support. In a subscription model, you risk losing the next renewal if you're not up to speed, and that's driving it. I think the elevation of integration as a story is actually coming out of the consumer world. As millennials come into the contact center, they want a Twitter or Facebook-like experience. They want to sit down and work. They don't want to learn 19 systems and which one has which data point and all that. So much of it's actually is a demand from the employee side as well. So I think, for us, on this call, it has worked quite well. In the sense that from a ServiceNow perspective, we recognize right from the founding that workflows are going to require multiple departments, multiple systems, all to work together. And that should be abstracted away from those that are doing the work, right? And so we were founded with that as a philosophy in mind. And I think that's started to play itself out throughout the industry quite well. And it served us well, quite frankly.
Yep. And Dennis, when it comes to 3C Logic, or Sharth, when it comes to Observe.ai, it's bringing in your expertise, but making sure that you're the best at what you do without necessarily trying to do, things that are outside of your scope, or maybe redundant because the platforms that you're integrating with, in this case, ServiceNow, already have that as native functions. So let's do this. Let's try and wrap up here. I'll leave it as an open-ended question to the three of you. We'll start with you, Dennis. What perhaps excites you the most? The whole theme today was about the future of the contact center, and what are the trends based on things that have occurred over the recent year and change. What perhaps excites you most if you look ahead?
Well, there's one thing we haven't talked about, and that is coming. It's not working yet, just as it should, but it's coming. It's real-time transcription, real-time analysis. And that's where all the pieces are going to work even better together, because now you have an agent that receives a call. That call is translated, is transcribed automatically at the same time. So many good things can happen from there. Suggestions are going to come because data mining will be done within ServiceNow, for example. And suggestions from the knowledge base are going to be posted to the agents. So to your point, Nitin, if the subscription is at risk, there will be all kind of specials that are going to pop, and they're going to be tailored to you, the customer, because we know all your history. You know how many years you've been with us. Yeah, we know if we really want to keep you or not, and how far we're going to go to do that. And we are arming the agents with the ability to actually be more intelligent, be more effective, give a better experience to the customer, and get to hopefully a good resolution. So I think that this is the future. We're not there yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, and then we're gonna have to find a new term, because then super agent may not cover it. But Sharf, what's your take? What gets you? What are you most excited about in, let's say, over the next 12 months?
I think Dennis stole my thunder. I think that would have been
sorry.
Because I think as a company, right? So we see that coming, right? So I think we are building technologies towards it. We probably will end up being the epicenter of it. We did not have the infrastructure till recently to actually ingest a real call stream in real time, because you cannot give a suggestion to an agent 3 seconds later, right? It has to be just in time. Today, the infrastructure is being ready. As an AI company, we believe that we are getting ready to kind of process that information in real time. And then when all this comes together really nicely on an interface or a system of record like ServiceNow, then just imagine the delightful experience that an agent can provide, right? So an agent will have a typical Facebook and Instagram kind of an interface where he or she will have all the information that they will need to support the customer on that call in the best possible scenario, right? So all of us are building our companies to probably provide the best experience to the end customer. Today, the technologies, the infrastructures are getting there. I think now with all these integrations and frameworks coming together, I just think the value of this customer interaction will be beautiful. And I'm looking forward to that day where we had this crazy thing when we started Observe.ai. We wanted to make customer interactions delightful. We wanted people who want to love calling a call center. And I think that is very close to being a reality with all the inflection of these technologies coming together.
That's really interesting. And if all of a sudden, if people love calling in and call centers become, a destination, right? They may, they become part of the experience, which is what you've been evangelizing quite a bit, and I agree with you. Then who knows what happens next? So Nid, we'll give you the closing statement. What's your take? What gets you most excited?
So let me step back to almost exactly 4 years ago when I came here. We had, as customer service management, taken on the moniker that customer service is a team sport. I think we're at the point where we're recognizing that, right? Which just generally across the entire industry, customer service is not an activity confined to a department. In order to serve customers well, you need to activate the entire organization and bring value. The value that you promised on the front end of the brand, right? That you're going to be there for me when I need you. And I think that recognition is going to do several things. One is it's going to elevate those companies that understand that to an even higher playing ground. And it will take, and potentially take, customer service and put it in the C-suite next to the CMO, and not be an operational part of COO's budget. I think that's really where we're headed. I mean, I pretty much see it, coming, and I think it's going to be a fun time for all of us that have been in this space for so long.
All right. So a year from now,
that will be the new C-suite title very soon.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, a year from now, we're going to come back and we're going to revisit these predictions, and we're going to see which one of you hit it on the head. Look, I really appreciate each of you contributing to today's discussion. Hopefully our audience found it informative, interesting, and of course, we'll continue to have events like these in the future. But on behalf of the entire team here at 3C Logic, obviously, thank you to our CEO, but most importantly, our additional guests, Nitin from ServiceNow, Sharath from Observe.ai. Really appreciate you guys lending us your insights. Thanks again. And to our audience, have a good day.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.